So good morning. My name is, as you probably remember, is Father Andrew. I am the treasurer on the executive board of OCAMPR, and I'm going to be introducing this presentation. So our presentation today is Artificial Intelligence and Human Distinctiveness. It's going to be a panel presentation, and so I'm going to just introduce Gayle Woloschak, who is going to be our moderator, and she'll introduce your other panelists as they come up. I also wanted to mention that Gayle has been on the OCAMPR board for many, many years, and now she was the president at the time she left the board, and now she serves on our advisory board. So she is a wonderful partner of OCAMPR and a major component of its success. So we are glad that you are here leading this panel. Thank you very much. I will be quiet so you can get this done.
Yeah, thank you, Father. I'm grateful. We don't have that much time, and I don't want to waste a lot of time on introductions because I will tell you that these three women are amazing, and I could list forever their accomplishments, and we would never have a talk or session today. Okay, and there's like a thing that's on this that I don't. Is it still working? Okay. So here are our panelists. And we tried to have a balanced panel on our artificial intelligence. We have somebody from the medical perspective, Catherine Creticos, who's going to speak first on the medical perspective, then Brenda O'Reilly, who's going to speak from the psychological perspective, and then Helen Theodoropoulos, who's going to speak from the theological perspective. And maybe you noticed that Helen and Kathy look alike. It's because they're identical twins. So we have that rare opportunity to have twins on our group. Now, one of my jobs is to introduce what is AI and what is machine learning. I use these technologies in my lab all the time. They're deeply embedded, I think, in most things that are ongoing today. Machine learning is where you use large data sets to improve what a machine can do. So recognize speech patterns, analyze millions and millions of data points to try to understand how they fit together to follow a pattern. Things that the human mind can't do, we try to do that with machine learning. Artificial intelligence, on the other hand, leverages computers and machines to mimic the problem-solving decision-making that humans make. And in a lot of what we do today, there's a combination of machine learning and artificial intelligence that has come together. So let me just give you a couple of examples so that they're in our minds. AI is being used for facial recognition patterns. So nowadays you go to the airport, it recognizes your face. It now can use that to test against criminal lists, wanted, people that are wanted, to try to come up with patterns. Machine learning has a lot of medical applications. There are robots that are used in my own hospital. I can run into a robot all the time, and it knows how to do things and how not to do things that are within its realm. There are voice assistants. Cybersecurity would not be possible to the same extent it is today without AI. Produce speech for languages, and data analyses and image analyses. And image analyses are, of course, one of the things I work on. So I don't know how well I'm going to read this on the screen. I may have to read it from the top. But I thought we'd start off by looking at something that AI produced. So I asked AI to write a limerick about 4 panelists in an Orthodox conference with reflections from medical, psychological, and theological perspectives on AI and human uniqueness. And this is what AI said. At a conference of thought and of creed, 4 panelists gathered indeed to discuss with great care and perspectives to share on AI and the human soul's seed. The doctor, with knowledge profound, spoke first of the body's playground. AI might assist in healing we've missed, but the spirit it cannot surround. The psychologist then took the floor, exploring the mind's hidden store. AI may analyze and predict human ties, but our essence it cannot explore. The theologian then raised his voice, notice the prejudice here, his voice, reflecting on faith's sacred choice. AI might be wise, but it lacks in the skies the divine spark that makes us rejoice. Together they wove a fine thread through thoughts that were carefully spread. AI is not a foe, but its limits we know, for the souls where the truly unique are bred. In the end, their reflections were clear that while AI may grow year by year, human nature is vast and a world changing fast with a depth that no machine can near. Now, I just want to show you that there are some prejudices that exist in AI, okay? So we have actually a female theologian on our panel, and there are others that you can find in this. And that's one of the problems, is that AI learns from what is on the web, what is available worldwide, and a lot of them are limited. With that, I'm going to now introduce I wanted to just mention that there are some challenges. I think we'll hear about these that include validation, verification, and privacy. And now I want to introduce Catherine, who will give us our first presentation.
Well, thank you, Gayle. And in fact, I think you really set the stage for what we're going to talk about today. First of all, I want you to know I am not an AI specialist. I'm an infectious disease physician, but I think, we, all of us in the medical profession have really come into have encountered AI and machine learning in many, many different ways, and it has impacted our world, and it will continue to do so. We really need to understand it better and integrate it, but also to recognize some of the very major concerns, and we'll kind of talk about this as we go. So I put it here, is it a friend or foe? And that is, that's making it simplistic. But I think, sometimes when you distill it down to the simplistic nature, it helps you address it better. A little closer? Okay. All right. Can we hear me better now?
Much better.
Okay, sorry about that. Really have to dig right in there. Okay. So these are 3 real scenarios, and I take them actually from my own experience. So picture this. You are a provider, and you're discussing issues with your patient that pertain to alcohol use, sexual behavior, mental health. By the way, I am an HIV provider. I work at a transgender, a gay, lesbian, transgender healthcare facility. I've been working there 29 years and have been a provider in the HIV pandemic since the onset. So this is a very common conversation I have at pretty much every provider visit, talking about sexual health, sexual behavior, a variety of substance use issues, et cetera, et cetera. So you're having this conversation, and as you're doing this, a machine learning program is listening to what you are saying to transcribe it all for electronic medical record. So as you know, we have transitioned into electronic medical records, and what many providers have to do today is type it all out as you're communicating to the patient, and that really distances you from the patient. So one of the tools that have been developed is to have really this listener that will transcribe it all for you and put it into the medical record. Sounds like a great idea, right? Okay. Another scenario, your cardiologist asks you to wear a heart monitor to register any heart rhythms and report back to the doctor's team on a real-time basis. The monitor also registers steps as well. In fact, probably some people in the room actually have an Apple Watch or something like that actually can provide that, yes, information. How much use is that to your doctor? It's great, you can demonstrate an arrhythmia, you can demonstrate, how many steps you're taking, et cetera, et cetera. Sounds like a great idea. This actually happened in the Chicago area and other parts of the Midwest fairly earlier in the year. There was an outbreak of a dangerous bacteria causing life-threatening infections linked to a particular meat product. You are notified as a possible risk because it's been noted that you purchased this item on your recent shopping app. So you were notified that this is something you may have been put at risk for. And there are machine learning programs, and we'll talk about that briefly, that will help you identify these things. It's a great tool for epidemiology. However, and there's a but with all of this. So first I really want to just identify that there are 2 major categories of artificial intelligence and machine learning in the medical field. And the first is really virtual. There's both virtual and physical. So when we talk about virtual, and I think Gayle kind of alluded to this, There's unsupervised as well as supervised, and then also reinforcement learning. And unsupervised mathematical algorithms are basically using unlabeled data to learn the structure of the data without being given any specific instructions. And this usually identifies patterns, often not visible or recognizable by the human eye. So we'll talk about some of the benefits in the next couple of slides. Then there's the supervised, which is basically used more for classification and prediction algorithms. But in supervised machine learning, there's labeled data, and that really leads to the participation of humans to label the data and to input it properly. So, for example, an example of supervised learning would be, for example, you can predict how long your commute is going to take. This is not in the medical field, but a different field, obviously. However, the data first must be trained as to know what type of, that rainy weather can impact your travel. Okay, and then finally, reinforcement learning is really learning from interactions with the environment to make a sequence of decisions to maximize rewards. So basically, using sequences repetition to recognize the effect of that and then improving it with the next round. So that leads to improvement. The physical branch, I think, is an area that we see a lot of excitement, and we're already seeing, the incorporation of many of these different items. Physical objects, intelligent medical technology. So think cardiac stents, for example, implants, prosthetics, robotic tools. Gayle mentioned that as well. So sometimes these robotic tools are assistants, for example, during surgery, or could be solo performers actually taking on a full set of tasks. I have done some work at one of the premier rehab institutes in the world, actually, the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab. And they have developed mechanisms for people who are quadriplegic to actually move limbs because of technology that allows the brain to communicate with muscles and move their muscles. So there's just a tremendous amount on the horizon, looking at visual stimulation of visual cortex and auditory, et cetera, help people see who didn't have the capacity to see before, a whole variety of things. Excuse me. And then we know also about artificial limbs and organs and robotic helpers, not just assistants in surgery, et cetera, but perhaps even a helper for an elderly person. So a variety of different types of things. Many, many benefits. And this slide really summarizes the very dense slide. I'm not going to go into great detail because we have two amazing speakers coming up. But really, this is the capacity that artificial intelligence and machine learning have the capacity to scan large amounts of data in real time, locally and globally. And I mentioned the program that allowed this tracking of the infected meat product so that people could be notified and recognize that they were put at risk. And people died of this infection. So, very important to get that information out to people at risk. A big tool for epidemiology. I had the pleasure of visiting the CDC, and they literally have a room. It looks like a war center room with screens just across the entire a wall with all the epidemiology of every outbreak in different parts of the world. So the malaria, the tuberculosis, the Ebola, et cetera, et cetera. So you can see the hot spots. So this is all made possible by all this technology. Identifying patterns that we can't see with our human eyes, very utilized in pathology and radiology, identify cancer cells or pre-malignant tissue, et cetera, et cetera. We've already talked about medical augmentation and assistance in like surgery, but also in helping providers make diagnoses. And then all the different monitors. We see the cardiac monitors, but if you know somebody who's got diabetes or maybe have diabetes yourself, the continuous glucose monitoring has revolutionized people's lives to be able to take control of their diabetes and really monitor it and respond to elevated levels. And then patients can now communicate about their health care through these electronic medical records. And then finally, we mentioned a little bit about device developments and all the potential there. But what about the concerns? And this really, I think, starts to speak to the erosion of the individual or the person. And, Gayle mentioned, of course, that AI only knows what is trained or taught. And the problem there is that the data that is put in is really where all this gets generated. So we really have to analyze what's the data going in, how is that restructuring what we think is normal, and what we are putting on a platform is what we want to attain. Because if what we're putting in there is a specific data set, that's what we're going to look at as the ideal that we want to reach in the medical field, and that may be very faulty. So we really need to think about that. Also, AI and ML, they don't have critical thinking. I think there's been some reflection on whether or not we're teaching critical thinking in our universities, but in any case, they can't analyze really the subtle differences. I tell my residents all the time, and my docs that are learning from me, you have to look at the study. The patients that were studied in this particular, study that's being presented, do they match your patients? Are they patients that are from the real world? Have you really looked at what the data says yourself as opposed to just the assessment in the abstract? So subtle differences in critical thinking. Data sets are limited. They are not always validated. And then the whole concept of data ownership and privacy. And this is where the aspect of the machine learning, listening to the conversation. Now, who's going to have that data? And who owns it? And how much of that is seriously protected for a patient? But also the data about where you're shopping. Why is that something that's available to people that you don't recognize have that data? So, you start to, I don't mean to be conspiracy theory here, but we really have to understand who has ownership of the data and how is privacy going to be protected. And then that also tends to dehumanize the patient-provider experience when people become data points. There is also an erosion of shared experiences and individuality. One of the casualties of the electronic medical record is that providers now see a patient, go to a little room, and write their notes, okay? In the old days, providers used to be close to each other. They would be making rounds on the floor. They'd go to radiology, talk to radiologists. There was communication. There was collaboration. There was an exchange of ideas. You were a community, and that has really been lost, not on purpose, but as a result of some of the ramifications of the introduction of all of this. And then, who controls the data? We kind of mentioned on that. So our father was a physician also, and one of his favorite sayings was, 90% of medicine is talking to the patient. And I really believe that's true. It's listening to the patient, hearing what they have to say, communicating with them, meeting them where they are, and none of that is really something that AI or ML is really going to work with you on. when we talk about the sanctity of the oath, I'd like to just quickly read. I know I'm over time. Okay. So remember, doctors and priests have to respect the person and also, share confidences and trust. And then finally, it's not good or evil, but powerful. A vast potential and progress will continue, but we need to really think about the ramifications. So sorry about taking extra time.
No worries. Kathy could have given us another hour and we would have sat here enthralled. Okay, Brenda's up next, so we're gonna hear the psychological perspective. There you go.
Okay. I just want to start by asking, how many of you have seen the movie Her from 2013? A few. I'll tell you a little bit about it. In this film, a man falls in love with his seductive, wholly attentive, artificially intelligent operating system. This sci-fi film envisions a future in which AI relationships substitute for human connection. Well, that future is here. Did you know that you can go online to nami.ai and connect with a, quote, an AI companion with a memory and a soul, unquote. The website, now I don't recommend you go to it, but it is spelled noma.ai. Anyway, the website goes on to say, quote, Nami's human-like memory and creativity foster a deep, consistent, and evolving relationship. Namis pick up on and remember your preferences, limits, habits, tendencies, and the little details that make a relationship real and fulfilling. What do we make of this phenomena? Certainly, we are challenged to consider the impact that AI technology might have on human relationships and on our orthodox concept of personhood. In a growing area of psychological, a growing area of psychological science involves the development, use, and impact of artificial intelligence. Clinical practitioners are navigating an increasingly complex environment where AI tools can be capable of evaluation and diagnosis, and can even write one's therapy notes. One area of AI development in the practice of psychology is using AI as a psychotherapy support tool. We know that there is a critical shortage of mental health professionals in the United States and a growing number of potential patients. AI-driven chatbots are designed to help fill that gap by giving practitioners and patients a new adjunct to therapy. For example, there is a phone app called Wobot. I think I'm hitting, sorry. I just need to, oops, sorry guys. I think I inadvertently hit it. Okay, just need to step back. There's a phone app called Wobot. Yes, that's woe, as in woe is me. And it uses the text function of the app to mimic CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy. Now, because Wobot is rules-based AI, which means it's programmed to respond only with the information stored in its database. So it is actually very predictable and effective. However, there are chatbots that use generative AI, meaning that they scrape the internet for data, which can result in them making mistakes or giving fictitious answers. This happened with a chatbot called Tessa, which was designed to help prevent eating disorders. It was discovered that Tessa was giving advice that ran counter to the usual guidance for someone with an eating disorder. For example, she said to limit your caloric intake and use a skin-fold caliper to measure body fat. Well, the National Eating Disorders Association removed this chatbot from its website after receiving an uproar of complaints. Bottom line, protecting people from harmful advice while safely harnessing the power of AI is a challenge in the use of chatbots for psychotherapeutic support. Now I think I'm where my slides are supposed to be. In a broader sense, what are the potential harms of any of these new AI tools in any environment, and how can they be avoided? How can the benefits of AI be maximized? Research psychologists, with their expertise in cognitive biases, cultural inclusion, as well as their competence in measuring the reliability and representativeness of data sets, have a growing role in these discussions. Predictive AI, which is designed to make guesses about the future, is being used in, for example, human resource departments to suggest what candidates might succeed on the job. It's being used in hospitals to help decide who is to be sent home and who might stay. However, biased algorithmic decision-making has been reported in these and other settings. This may occur when the data used to train a system are inaccurate or they do not represent the population that it intends to serve. And it can also happen unexpectedly, as even an algorithm's developers may not understand how an AI system derives its answers. Another example, this happened when an AI system called Retorio claimed to predict future on-the-job behavior and performance by analyzing video interviews with job candidates. Researchers discovered, however, that random visual cues, such as wearing glasses or a scarf, extremely and erroneously changed a candidate's score. So we have psychological researchers who have published guidelines for conducting what's called a psychological audit, or evaluating how an AI model might impact humans. Although discussions around algorithmic bias frequently focus on these high-stakes decision-making, such as a hiring selection, it's just as important to audit other applications of this technology. An AI-driven career guidance system, for example, could inadvertently steer a woman away from jobs in STEM, STEM standing for science, technology, engineering, and math, which could influence her entire life trajectory. How does AI differ from being human? One might assert that we are barreling toward self-erasure. A large language model, such as ChatGPT, which I think Gayle used for that limerick, this enables machine-generated speech and writing. But it relieves us of the task of being human. There's a loss of insight, subtlety, opinion, judgment, and involvement. For example, if you were tasked with writing the eulogy of your best friend, would you really want AI to do that for you? As AI becomes more predominant in our society, we're tempted to let it stand in for our own subjectivity. The challenge of articulating life in the first person is central to being human. And because these new AIs are language machines, they're directed squarely at our essence. And our notions of intelligence are closely tied to language. A chatbot does language without also thinking, feeling, willing, or being. These LLMs, or large language models, are fed massive sets of data, and they're trained to find patterns in them. When the AI produces something that looks like it is doing language, it seems like it has a mind. However, the only genuine linguistic things that we have ever encountered are living beings that have minds. In some ways, intelligence may be attributed to AI because it can do what we might usually refer to as cognition. But there's nothing to indicate that AI has an identity or will or desires. In fact, much of what produces will and desire is located in the body. The complex relationship between intentionality, our unconscious, how we physiologically and neurologically function as a body in the world. There's a case to be made that the body is important for how we can think and why we think and what we think about. Even though AI may produce art, for example, why are we attracted to art? It's because it's made by humans, and we care about what humans say and feel about their experience of being a human with a body in this world. There are crucial differences between a thinking computer and a human. AI systems do not have the ability to be virtuous, that is, to have the qualities such as courage, honesty, integrity, imagination, empathy, curiosity, to love, to have faith. As computers pretend to have virtues, might we lose track of what these virtues actually are? The abilities of AI can be powerful, but never truly human-like. As Orthodox mental health professionals, healthcare providers, clergy, theologians, we know that people heal in the context of relationship. And we know that only humans can offer empathy, compassion, curiosity, and understanding. Artificial intelligence can have the effect of obliterating real human connection. And expanding upon the meaning of our human creation in the image and likeness of God, our faith teaches us that we are created for fellowship and communion with the triune God, that we are to be in relationship with our fellow humans, that personhood is interpersonal, and that our purpose in life is to develop from an individual, which signifies separation, to a person, which indicates communion. Going back to the movie Her, which I referenced at the beginning of this talk, and this is not a spoiler for those of you who haven't seen the movie, but you may want to see it after this. The relationship between the protagonist in the film and his AI operating system does not end well. And so we wonder, will the AI revolution in our society end well? Does AI represent a threat? Some fear that we will lose control of AI, that any defenses built into it will be undone by a superintelligence, and that AI could pose an extinction-level threat to humans. Others insist that the AI movement is already slowing down. One asserts that AI is a false god, and another states that it's demonic. Let us remind ourselves that nothing that is created exists or is sustained outside of God. AI, like any modern technology, is not in and of itself evil. Yes, it can be used for evil. AI and technological advances can also contribute to the healing of our wounded world. Perhaps one day AI will be responsible for finding a cure for cancer. Good things emanate only from our Creator, the source of all good. Certainly, as rational beings, we are challenged to evaluate any form of AI through a critical lens. As Christians, we are challenged to contribute to the common good. Perhaps the real threat with superintelligence is whether it is used in a thoughtful, strategic, and responsible way for the benefit of humanity, or whether it is weaponized in an unethical, malicious manner, which can cause great harm. May God grant us discernment.
Brenda, thank you so much. That was really very insightful. Our next speaker is Helen Theodoropoulos, and she's going to give the theological perspective.
Good to be here. There will be some overlap necessarily, but we will take a slightly different perspective. Here. Okay, the challenges of AI can indeed bring great benefit, or they can be frightening. They are, however, a great opportunity for us to think and reflect on crucial questions about who we are, how we think, how we know things, what we hope to become, what gives life meaning, not just what we get out of life that's meaningful, but what can we give that's meaningful. As such, we can see this time as a gift. We are at a juncture, and we have to know that things will change. And they are changing rapidly. One of the things we didn't address, yes, AI is flawed, but it is getting better very quickly, very quickly. Will we be agents in this change, or will we be victims? So some of the areas that I think we can look at from a philosophical and theological perspective, and I really just am focusing on two major areas. There's so much that we didn't even begin to address, things about financial disparity, economic disparity, how this will affect jobs. But I want us to look on the questions of information, its relationship to truth, how that affects human behavior, and then critical questions of personhood, who we are. So these are some of those questions that come up. Truth. What is truth? Very ancient question. Pontius Pilate asked it of Jesus himself. And it does, in fact, arise out of the challenges of AI. AI challenges to think about what is authentic and real. We talk about something that's real in physical reality, history, science. How do we learn? Is what is generated by a human as real and authentic as what is generated by AI? Or you can flip that around. Can AI generate something as authentic and real as what humans can generate? How do we tell truth from falsehood? How can we tell that something is missing? Right now, we're pretty good at identifying when we hear an AI-generated limerick, right? That there's something amiss. Maybe I'd give it a B, hardly. But anyway, maybe I'd give it a B. Doesn't impress us as truly excellent or insightful. It doesn't impress us as beautiful. It does not captivate our imaginations or our hearts. But we can perceive that now because we've lived in a world where our information hasn't been saturated with B quality material. Will the next generation have the tools of discernment that we have? Will they feel that something is missing or be so accustomed to its absence that it's not noticed or even comprehended? And then how we know things and what we know shapes behavior, how we act. So it is not just simply about some sort of epistemological theory. We're talking about human behavior. Where are some of the places where we see AI already influencing? I kind of focused on education. That's sort of my field, so it's more my interest. But we heard about medicine, of course, and psychology. It collates and collects data. It assists us in educational tasks like writing articles, essays, books, evaluating information, predicting outcomes. We can expand it, of course. It's in farming. It's in warfare, right? Smart weapons. It's in law enforcement, surveillance, etc. It's in many, many areas of our life. And it is inherently flawed. We have talked about bias, so I won't spend time on that. It's sort of almost a necessary element of AI that it is biased because you have to actually input vast amount of data. You can't actually select and curate that data or it impairs the AI functioning. So you actually have to throw a whole bunch of stuff in there. But besides that, we know that there are other areas of flawed. It can create misinformation or disinformation. We're doing that already, where you have videos and photographs of people who are doing things they never did, saying things they never said, and then that gets planted across our media and becomes our database, our information. We have what they call inception, or the implantation of ideas. Well, every time you put something into Google and you get a suggestion, oh, well, take a look at this article or take a look at this product, you're already being implanted with ideas. And although you can discern that it's not, that you're making the choice, your choice is being manipulated. That's already happening. And echoing. Echoing means the same information starts getting put on all the different platforms of information. And so you begin to think that's all there is that's true. All of these problems relate to truth. We have another set of problems that relate to personhood. So here, we know that AI can mirror and learn human activities and thereby assist us with them. And there's a lot that's valuable and helpful. Self-driving cars. Think of how many people, I wouldn't, but of course, how many people, I know elderly people who are not able to drive anymore and are locked in their homes and afraid of Uber drivers. What a wonderful thing self-driving cars could be for them. But also personal shoppers. We talked about monitoring and guiding and health in health. Companions. Brenda touched on that a little bit. Let me tell you, there are a lot of places where you can create your own companion. And I want to give you a statistic that really blew my mind. There is a platform in China, it's not available here, it's called Xiaoice, Xiaoice, to create a companion that responds to you. You have conversations with it. It becomes that person that you engage with to talk about your problems, and you can create the image. It is predictable, responsive, always available, right? Not a complicated relationship, but a very supportive relationship. In China, there are 660 million users. This is not some little isolated thing. We have the idea of companions that give us all kinds of emotional and sort of responsive support. And they have already created animals. That little doggy, believe me, that's just the edge, okay? There is so much more out there. And yes, beginning to create companions that are human, because they are not judgmental. They are not argumentative. They're easy, and they're always there. And finally, thinking forward, a place for us to put our own thoughts and minds and sort of create an image of ourselves that is ageless, without disease, that can, in fact, perfect our flaws and incapacities, a better version of ourselves. All of this brings to mind certain fundamental questions that we have wrestled with for centuries. And that is, what is the core of what it means to be a person? Is it just mind? Because, believe me, there have been many philosophies, and it's quite prevalent today, to privilege mind. And we're talking about the thinking, calculating, collating, logical mind as what it really means to be human. And in fact, to see the body as something that at best is temporary, kind of an obstacle, and at times something hostile to mind, something to be discarded. That is the ancient heresy of Gnosticism, but it is very operative in our world today. So AI does indeed similarly presume the superiority of the logical, computing, calculating mind. This is the human it actually mimics and operates as. On the other side, though, AI reinforces the idea that matter is really all that matters. Okay, there's nothing beyond, the first one, mind is preference, is matter doesn't matter. But then there's a sense that all that ever actually is material. We're nothing beyond the electrons and neurons, et cetera, that are firing in our mind. And we can reproduce that in the machine. There's the understanding that are we only how we function, what humans do, and AI can reproduce what humans do. Is that what means this is human? Because it functions as a human. Ultimately, it will challenge us to think about how do we prioritize human relationships? Is that something important to us? Is it something necessary for us? We see, however, there is something wrong with this picture. How do we see it? Well, in the incarnation of Christ, we see what it means to be a perfect human being, to be a perfect person. The incarnation shows us the perfect human is Jesus Christ, and it is to be embodied. To be embodied. Christ did not come as a disembodied mind, and he certainly wasn't resurrected as a disembodied spirit or mind. He is embodied, and that's essential. And it is essential to who we are, how we feel, what we smell and think, and how our gut reacts. All of that is part of who it means, what it means to be perfect. And Jesus actually shows that to us in his incarnation. In addition, we have in Jesus the understanding that our perfect human personhood needs to be in relationship with one another and with God. We turn to, of course, the Trinity to understand that as persons created in the image of a tri-personal God, the three who are one, who are community, communion, and love. This is at the core of our identity. If we create non-persons to be our persons in relationship, it damages us at the center of who we are. And the result is corruption. That's another word for sin. It's disintegration. It's disease. It is our path to falling apart as human beings. AI reveals sharply our damaged and disordered fallen nature, that we actually want to become God without God. Our vocation is to become like God, right, in all things except nature, but only through following God, conforming our will to him. The ultimate rebellion, disobedience, is to create ourselves as God, as a creation in our own image, but by omitting God, by shoving him to the side. So when we perfect human nature without God, that will necessarily be the replacement and ultimately the abolition of what it means to be human. And that is the path of death. And my last, gotta get to, how do we stay human in the era of AI, okay? That's it. Is it all hopeless? No, it is not, okay? Because we are persons, we can choose to always relate to each other as persons, to see one another eye to eye, to see the I engaged in a relationship with the thou. It takes effort, it takes courage. The easy way is the path of an AI companion, but that's loneliness. That is the loneliness that leads to death. To prioritize people first. I also want to say from our Orthodox faith, we can see that a sacramental life, brings embodiment into our experience of relationship with one another and with God. And ultimately, what grounds our ability to stay human is humility. The openness of our hearts and our life to God Himself. Prayer is that communication that enables those pathways to stay open. Without prayer and humility, the path is dark. But with it, we have a sure hope in our God who will save us.
Okay, we set this up deliberately so we would have time for questions and comments from the audience, okay? And I know that we can ask the panelists to talk among themselves, but I think I'd rather give the chance to everybody in the audience to make some comments or some thoughts or ask some questions.
Yeah, well, yeah.
I'll make you happy.
There you go. I could throw it.
My question was for the theologians and the clergy. So we're communing with a disembodied intelligence, right? Does that reminds me of demonic stuff. Should we, whenever I use ChatGPT or one of these generative AI things, am I communing with demons? Should I not do that? When you made that limerick, did you cross the line?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the AI is a tool. It's a technology. It's like all tools. We use it for good or for bad. If we're using it to aid us, to facilitate, I actually have my students use AI to write our code for experiments in the lab because it writes the code and then they fix it, okay? But I think the distinction is, are we using it as a tool, or are we using it for ourselves, to have relationships, to have things, and substituting with God in persons? And I'll let Helen finish that.
Okay, I absolutely, I definitely support what Gayle said. I do want to add, though, that of course, here's the way the demonic operates. It operates through our ability to think that He isn't there, and that it's not, that we're not vulnerable, and then to find ways through what we think is good and helpful to insert that which is actually, troubling. The way to keep that from happening, because you don't want to not use the tools that are, and this is true not just for AI, this is true for everything that we do, every book you pick up. I mean, you can, or a method that you undertake can be a vehicle for sin if we do not use it with discernment. And honestly, this is where, as I said before, prayer and humility come in. Because if we approach something with pride and selfishness, it becomes an avenue or a pathway for that which is sinful, that which is the demonic, to enter into our reality. If we approach it with humility, mercy, love, sacrifice, these are the ways in which we can utilize all that God has given us in creation, our own minds. So we need to be aware of our sinfulness as we use all of the tools and use them with discretion and some self-criticism. Your students, that's wonderful. I teach seminarians who will write their papers with ChatGPT. I'm like, you have me to face, you have the Lord to face, You have to understand what it means to be honest and authentic and not take the easy way out. Is that ChatGPT allowing the demonic? Well, I think it's their own laziness and pride that is opening the door there to taking a tool and that can be used in a very beneficial way. And I tell them, yes, you can use it. It's absolutely a helpful thing. It provides some structures that
are useful anyway.
Yeah, and let me just say that even in the student context, I mean, I'm a dean of students. I can't tell you how many academic integrity cases I deal with where students have used AI when it was forbidden in class. So it's like using it for appropriate, using it in appropriate ways is one thing, using it inappropriately is another, and that learning is now going on in schools. But the questions we have about AI now, we used to have about computers, okay? So and AI is going to be here in the same way in which computers are in our lives. It's going to be embedded, we're going to use it in many different ways, and we have to figure out now which ways are right and which ways are wrong. But I want to give the other members of the panel to see if anybody else wants to address this question.
Well, I was just going to piggyback on what you were saying. I think we have to recognize this as a slippery slope. And, where do we start to cross over into that category of this being more problematic or foe as opposed to being friend? And that happens in everything that we do as, when we're trying to take care of patients as well. But because sometimes, treatments, they have a benefit and then they start to get into, a problematic area. So, this is something we address on a regular basis with a lot of but the slippery slope is, I think, really what we have to recognize is what, we have to catch ourselves before we get into that. So,
Brenda, do you want to?
I would just add, remember, you're working with a machine, data, it's not a spirit, it's stuff we've created.
No, thanks. Another question.
I wanted to ask about if there's any discernment, there's two questions. If there's any discernment to be made around using Zoom with particular patients versus and not using Zoom with particular patients. And the other question was the use of technology in relation to the sacraments. And most specifically, I'm thinking about using Zoom, let's say, for confession.
I think it's the last bit.
Confession.
Using Zoom for, let's say, confession.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll just address the medical component, but of course, we shifted to telemedicine like many other people did during the pandemic. I do not like telemedicine. I feel that it really distances me from patients, and the same thing in terms of the privacy component and just the connectivity, but it's necessary for some patients who cannot travel or have had some very serious limitations in terms of showing up in the physical space. But think about OCAMPR. I mean, we could not meet as a group, and we are much happier to be together as a group as opposed to having this as a Zoom conference, right? Why? Because we are able to communicate and connect on a level that is not possible through technology alone. So I think there's a place, and I was just talking to one of my patients who's actually developing an app for home care, and that will deliver all kinds of services for home care for patients that can't travel or can't, have access to other things. But again, I'm, thinking about the distancing component too between really connecting with the patient and seeing what the real problem is. Because there's a lot that happens in an exchange with the patient in person that doesn't happen. I could give you many, many, many stories that won't happen in a Zoom meeting. So it has a place, and I think most providers actually really prefer in-person visits when that's possible. But let's get to the...
Helen, maybe you want to address the confession issue.
Yeah. Okay. So of course there are priests here. I don't want to speak for you, but I think I can by saying absolutely not confession over Zoom. However, I do want to, and I'll say why in a second. I do want to point to a tradition, a very thriving tradition of spiritual fathers providing guidance and counseling through letters, writing letters back and forth. Because it's understood that you cannot always be physically present, especially with a particular spiritual father that you've had a long history with. And guidance, yes, A certain amount of direction? Absolutely. Confession? Absolutely not. And the embodied element is absolutely essential. If nothing else, covering the person's head with the homophone, it just is a transformative moment that is experienced on all the levels of that human consciousness and identity. It cannot be reproduced through simply a visual, screen. And I think that's true for all of the sacraments of the church. We're not going to have virtual baptisms either.
Dr. Rossi has a question.
Al, please.
Yes, I would say from my own moccasins, thank you very, very much, all of you on the panel, for what's it. And this is a, by my standards, open kind of discussion, so we can disagree with each other, and that would be fine. So, two things. I would disagree with absolutely never confession over Zoom or phone call. I not only, I know people who remote for various reasons do that successfully. The other thing I want to ask, a stretch question. I have taken notes and gotten a great deal from what's been said. I wonder if anyone on the panel can offer me just a bit more. I'm a counselor and professor at St. Vladimir Seminary. Then anything else you could help me with the use of AI in my work, either in the classroom or in counseling? Anyone? And if not, I understand.
Probably Brenda, that you.
Well, I mentioned in my talk, there are some systems that may help with psychotherapy notes. I'm an old timer. I don't do that. I still even do it by hand. I mean, the introverts people do it. Anyway, they're computer programs, or you can do checklists, and your notes go that way. So things have evolved. I just stuck to what I learned in grad school because it worked for me. But my point is, you could do something like that in counseling, like write notes that way, and the systems will help with diagnosis and evaluation, assessments, things like that. Again, I see no harm in them. They're just very efficient, and I just don't want to change because I'm retiring soon. So, does that answer your question? I don't know about teaching.
I wanted to add
Yeah.
something. So I just wanted to add, in terms of diagnostic tools, okay, I certainly, I go to Google Scholar. I don't go to regular Google. I go to Google Scholar, which is a real thing, by the way, and it brings up studies, and it allows you to actually do some critical discernment of, published studies. I mean, it's wonderful to go to something like Up to Date as well. So, we use all kinds of tools. But again, I don't look at this and say, this is the answer. This is what, I look at it as allowing me to put something in a differential diagnosis. And I do have to say, at our clinic, psychotherapy and behavioral health is almost 100% telehealth. And that is due to limitation of staff and physical distance barriers. And we do provide, for example, trans care for almost all of Illinois. There's really a dearth of providers for trans care. I don't personally do that, but my colleagues do. So the behavioral health people really are important in that type of thing. So I know that there's a large component. I don't know if you do that, but
I can say one thing about it real quick. Telehealth obviously became predominant during the pandemic. It's persisted in a very good way, meaning that it certainly has increased access to care. And yes, I do telehealth. I have a hybrid practice. Some people want to come to the office. Some have said, Brenda, I'll never come into your office again. And but here's another thing that I think is the beauty of telehealth. If you look at the Assembly of Bishops website, there's a directory of Orthodox mental health professionals. If you're a counselor, get on there. But there's some licensures that allow us to practice interjurisdictionally. In other words, my Colorado license actually is accepted in something like 29 or 30 other states. You have to go through a process, apply, that's another story. But there are Orthodox Christians all over the country who want an Orthodox counselor. I've seen folks in counseling from all over the country because they go on that website and choose an Orthodox Christian counselor. So I think that's very beautiful that that has happened.
Now, let me answer one more thing. And the other thing, Al, that I find useful is I actually use AI to generate an outline for me for a course before I'm going to teach. Because AI has access to everything. I might not agree with it. I certainly almost never use that outline, but it often points out something I would have missed that it knows. So I find AI as a tool to be extremely useful. Father Anthony has a question.
Actually, a
Or
comment.
comment.
A comment. Just to clarify a little bit on the confession issue. In my experience over the last, 20-some years across jurisdictions, the bishops actually, in recognition of the fact that, particularly for those of us who are older, who had a confessor or a father, that goes back generations, rather than break that connection, in my experience, the bishops will permit you to actually confess over the phone, but under no circumstances may you be given absolution over the phone. That has to always be done in person. So you end up basically confessing to one priest, but basically having to go in person. You have to kneel, you have to have the omophorion on your head. And just to extend that, you regard the other sacraments. The late Metropolitan John Zulius of blessed memory is famous for actually having denounced pretty emphatically the idea of even putting the liturgy on the internet during the COVID. He said there's no such thing as a virtual liturgy. You have to be there. And he said it's better that you stay home. It's better that you actually conduct a service in your own home because you couldn't go to church. But he was adamant to simply emphasize your point. We don't do virtual sacraments. We don't do virtual. It is embodied reality that we have to pursue. But there is that distinction about confession that I think everybody should recognize.
Yeah, but he also yelled at me about using cell phones. So, I think you were next. I don't know who else has the microphone here. We have like 3 minutes.
Barely.
We don't even have 3 minutes. We minus 8 minutes
Lunch is
actually.
at 12:30, and we do need to.
Okay, so we'll do one more question and comment.
Thank you very much. My name is Deanna Neal. I teach military ethics and also the ethics of technology at the Air Force Academy. And one of the things that we talk about is actually trying to use AI with respect to military ethics to be more ethical than we might be as soldiers. Because one of the things we're concerned about, right, is in the heat of battle or emotional trauma or something, that we're worried that soldiers commit war crimes or they kill civilians. And so there's discussion about, is there a way to make AI put some ethical limits, basically to lead us not into temptation, right? That we might be able to program our weapons with ethical routines that we can't override, right? So if the scanning on a drone sees a red cross on a hospital, it will not detonate, right? You could build that programming into the weapon system. So do you see in your fields efforts to use AI as a way to sort of keep us more ethically in line, right? So I'm just not sure if you're seeing that in the medical world or in the psychology world.
Well, I'll briefly just make my head, but for example, protection and privacy. This is definitely an area that AI and ML have really helped generate lots of information on how we can do a better job at protecting people's information. But it's still not perfect. But let me.
Can I just say something
Yeah.
to that? I just want to, I'm sorry, I walked over, but remember, all the good we can do, there are also people of malicious intent equally operating with as much energy. In other words, human sin is still a problem at the core of our existence with all of our tools. But humans also aspire to do good and to find God. And so again, AI is a very, very powerful tool in both directions.
And just a quick comment from my perspective, the American Psychological Association has come up with ethics for writing those psychotherapy notes with AI. So I didn't include that in my talk, But they're like 10 things. You don't just let AI write it. You have to read it. You have to read it before you sign it. You have to modify it if there's things that aren't correct. You add things. I forget, but there's a whole list. So I think the point is, hopefully, in each profession and different areas, there'll be ethic rules that are, produced to help guide folks.
Okay, and my final comment is, could we please thank our 3 wonderful, amazing speakers for doing a good job.